strengthen the relationship between Taiwan and the United States. As one of the general public, all wish we just had a steady life and a steady government, and so all that can keep going. And I did see that you do a lot of work on this aspect. So I really appreciate it. I hope you can stay this job as long as you can.
Thank you very much for those kind of thoughts. I appreciate it.
My name is younger. I'm your driver. So no question because we not enough time.
We keep in time, yeah, right.
Okay, I will make it short. Yeah, my name is Randy Chen. Yeah, I'm currently the first VP of the Chamber of Commerce of Taiwan, Taiwanese Commerce, and I'm also the president of the San Francisco Bay Area Lions Club.
Oh, okay.
So I came from Kaohsiung, and I spent a few years working in Taiwan and then moved to US. And that's TSMC moved me to US. Actually, I worked for TSMC as well. But when I graduated from school, I started in semiconductor research work in Erso, that's E3. That was 4-inch wafer, now it's 12-inch. So after spending 30 years, working in semiconductor and solar. Actually, I'm now in solar. I'm not with TSMC anymore. I work for companies in Taiwan, and I work for a company in the US as well. I was with Motorola in Arizona back in 96, 97. And I work for Chinese company in solar industry. And, the company is in Shanghai. So I have experience working with companies in 3 countries. I can tell the differences very different, or it's related to the company, people and the culture of the country, right? I would say the main differences between Taiwanese and Chinese is Taiwanese are very loyal. We're very loyal,
Yes.
We're loyal to the relationship and to the alliance with U.S. government, right? The Chinese, they say they are loyal too, but that's they say, right? Whatever they say, right? They don't mean it, right? So that's my point, right? So when I work for Chinese company, one thing really shocked me is that whatever they say, they don't mean it. And they don't have trust on people, even people of the same company, even people of the same country. They don't. I work in China on the street. That shocked me. In Taiwan, when we get lost, we ask people, right? And people, oh, you should do this, go that way, you should go that way. I'm sure you have this experience in Taiwan, right? So when I was in China, I was lost in Hangzhou. I talked to people, hey, can you show me, how can I get back to my hotel? And then there was a couple, right? These people, I asked the husband, and the wife said, oh no, don't talk to that guy, Walk away. He was kind of pulled away by his wife. I was shocked. Do I look like a bad guy or what? Same thing in the elevator, right? In US, we check with people, right? Hey, how are you? Good day, right? Same thing in the elevator. I talk to people, hey, how are you? Right? And then the people was like, what are you doing? Why are you talking to me? What do you want to get from me, right? So by saying that, I say I have seen in the past 30 years, I've been through the booming years of Taiwan, 80s, 90s, right? And I've been through the booming years of China. And unfortunately, I have some contribution with China's, growth. When I was with Motorola sent me to China to build an 8-inch fab in Tianjin, right? I trained the Chinese engineers. I hired 30 engineers from China, and under me, that was 96 when China was launching missiles to Taiwan, right? I I was with Moro, and my boss asked me, "Hey, Randy, if there's a war with China, what will you do?" I said, "Send me back to Taiwan. I want to kill some, communists." So, anyway, but we have seen all this. But now I'm happy that U.S. government is now kind of understanding. That's, in my opinion, that China really is a threat to the democracy, to our countries. And I'm happy that the previous administration has kind of reversed course, right? And I hope that the current administration will continue, and strengthening our relationship between Taiwan and the U.S. And my vision is to kind of, through my capacity, right, to promote the cooperation and to kind of reinvest between two countries. That's what I'm doing in Taiwan and here, to kind of, to demonstrate, there's a value of democracy, there's a value of freedom, that we should make it work, we should make it, successful for both countries. That's my vision and that's my goal.
Very well said. My handlers are getting nervous that I'm going over time here, but I will quickly say that, what you say strikes so many chords with me, because I've been telling U.S. companies for years that don't expect loyalty from a Chinese employee. And that's just the way the culture is. They will flip immediately if they get a better offer, if they have to steal some of your technology to implement that offer, they'll do it. And I think U.S. companies are, by and large, more aware of that than they used to be. And in terms of the lying, I tell people that, if I feel myself getting kind of sluggish in the morning, kind of slowed down, haven't had enough coffee yet, I just read the daily press summary from our embassy in Beijing about what the Chinese press is saying, and I just go, that's not true. It's like, as they like to say, trying to make black white or white black, I forget, but the Chinese always use this, and it's usually describing something that America has done that is the right thing to do, so I used to seeing that kind of behavior from the government, and frankly, in that kind of behavior, and when your sources of information are very limited, or at least much more limited than in a democracy, it does affect people over time. And the lack of trust that you touched on.
Yeah, so on this issue, what are you feeling about the last two meetings between US and China in Alaska and in Tianjin?
Well, they kind of, the Chinese were incapable of trying to correct anything. And you can see this just from reading the Chinese papers, is that there is, of right now, no room to correct or change policy in areas that we think policy needs to be changed. Just nothing. And so it just becomes an attack on the Americans for criticizing those policies. It's not just the Americans, that goes on globally. Anybody who criticizes human rights abuses in Xinjiang, well, maybe they'll slap sanctions on them. There's just not much flexibility in their system at all, because it is a one-man system.
Currently, the way they're doing is, whatever you do to China, they will retaliate.
Yeah, and that doesn't lead to a resumption of a friendlier U.S.-China relationship, because there is bipartisan knowledge, but also public knowledge that China's behavior in a number of areas has to, well, I'll put it this way, threatens the United States and needs to change from our perspective. And if it doesn't change, they can't expect a better relationship. Sorry, like I said, I'm supposed to be on a tight leash here. Next.
Hi, my name is Rick Shen. I'm actually was born in Taiwan and grew up in the States. I lead the current nonprofit Technology and Science Association. So I was one of our former president. I'm the current president right now. I work in the high-tech industry. I previously worked at Qualcomm and at Intel as a director of engineering. I'm now at a company called LightPoint, in charge of their 5G business development and product marketing. we're a US-based company with sites in Taiwan and other places in Asia. I guess I have two quick questions on technology aspect. One is we're seeing the importance of semiconductor supply chain, but I also want to ask about from the US kind of perspective, are there other aspects of technologies that the two US and Taiwan can collaborate on? I'll give some examples and maybe you can also share if you see areas in healthcare, if you see areas in 5G, if you see areas in perhaps in they call Industry 4.0 or smart manufacturing,
Right.
or maybe even in areas like AI, artificial intelligence, or blockchain. If you can maybe comment on the kind of other aspects of technologies that two sides can work together on. And then maybe the second part of the question is, you talked about the student exchange programs. We've seen the Go Kart program that has been initiated by Taiwan, a lot of foreign talents. Do you foresee in the future other areas of technology, workforce exchange, either at the professional level or at the executive level in the future?
Yeah, the answer to your first question is yes, all of the above. You know, these are topics, you know, how do we, this is part of the economic partnership policy discussions that I was talking about last night. All of those areas are falling under that. You know, the Undersecretary at the time, Mr. Kroc, went out there as a real thinker saying, okay, where are the alternatives? Where are these issues that we can cooperate on? And so yes, those are topics that are scheduled for discussion, and we're going to try and figure things out. Second question about will there be new programs? Yeah, probably. Is there going to be more funding for existing programs? Definitely. You know, I think that some of you probably were aware that we closed down Fulbright on the mainland, and you know, all of those scholars went to Taiwan and worked out very well. So there will be presumably more interest in and more money for Fulbrights, but you know, new programs too. If people have good ideas, as I was saying earlier to my friends, bring them in. You know, let's see what we can do. You know, I used to say when I was an ambassador, I always look to the Department of Defense if you want to have money to do good things. But now I would say, you know, your TechRo friends are very good at this, you know, trying to find the little pockets of money that are going to come into existence, but work directly with a State Department that is much more U.S. Department of State that is much more energized about trying to find things that we can do together. So yeah, there is a lot more interest, and I'm pretty sure that interest is going to get turned into real progress.
Yeah, I'm Joe, and as of today, I'm a past pastor president. So you see that in my speech, I focus on combining the Chamber of Commerce and high-tech technology group. The reason is I was assistant professor. Then after I got my permanent visa, I moved into HP because the pay is double. And then from there, I started as a professor association's president in San Diego. And then someone introduced me to the Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce. And that's the second generation. The way they do business is very mainstream, connected to the mainstream politician and all that to help Taiwan. And then an opportunity came, I became a chairman of the Asian Business Association, the board. I started from just regular board member all the way to vice chair, 2 years, chair 2 years. And there we have a lot of power to use our assets, $1 million annual budget, working with a lot of mayors, almost you name it, congressmen. And so use that head, I could help the TechRo head to visit all these elected officials and help shape the U.S.-Taiwan relationship in a many different ways. And from there, I realized the importance of the technology combining with the Chamber of Commerce. Because technology group, they don't have this asset and this kind of connection to the mainstream through this Chamber of Commerce work. And that's wherever you go, that's the same thing. The Chamber is pretty powerful in the mainstream society. So when I come here, they introduced me to this group. I actually worked with them 20 years ago since San Diego there because I was chapter president. And I know this chapter and started to work in school. So I brought in the album. I know I was the president, headquarter president and chapter president before the album. I forgot to mention that. So I'm happy to see all this kind of relationship that we could combine the commerce people and technology people, because we are in this heart of the technology hub, right? So that's happening. And now our next president, our current president, is also working in that area. So through this, we could do a lot of work. Just one very quick question: how does AIT shape the policy? Is it only the Biden administration make decision and you got carry, or how do you help shape the U.S.-Taiwan relationship?
Well, AIT, Washington and AIT as an organization is supposedly an implementer, and AIT Taipei is in effect an arm of AIT, but basically is also virtually like an embassy. So it performs all the functions of a normal embassy. All of its employees are seconded from their home agency and continue to work for their home agency now. And they try to influence policy just like any embassy would. Here's what we're seeing on the ground, here's what we think is important. I have a unique role. There's nothing like this in the world. As far as I know, the Japanese have something vaguely similar, but not really. Just because I'm head of the nonprofit, which means I don't really have direct control over AIT Taipei. And so what I do is go in and discuss policy with people and speak to folks like you. Because I've been doing this for a long time, I kind of am listened to and my advice is taken seriously. So it's not that different from what in a way, I know that I've said it's completely different. It's not that different from what an ambassador does with respect to Washington. With respect to an embassy in a country, the ambassador is trying to lead the team. But going back to Washington, what they're trying to do is say, hey, this is the way things look like to me, this is the way we think policy should be headed, and try to make sure that there's agreement. In fact, I've told the current director that she should make sure she gets back to Washington on a regular basis, just to say, okay, here's what I'm seeing on the ground, here's where I think the direction I think things should be headed. And so maybe it's just because it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, but that's a large part of what I do when I go to Washington is try to make sure that. Also, since I am based in Honolulu, on the security issues, I work very closely with Indo-PACOM and advise them on, again, what I'm hearing in Washington, but also what I think is a smart thing for us to be doing in Taiwan.
Yeah, my name is.
Sorry, I'm becoming curious.
Oh.
Too many questions. So, the AIT, in fact, or de facto, is serving as an embassy, to Taiwan. So, could you, find some way to really change the name to formalize it, become an American embassy in Taiwan?
Sure, we could, and then I'd have to put on my security hat and say, okay, are we ready for what the Chinese are going to do? We can't predict what they would do, but I could predict that something like that would force them to do something that neither Taiwan nor the U.S. would like.
Mm-hmm. How much resistance from China should be allowed, right?
One thing I've also learned is to be modest and trying to predict China. We don't know what sort of options would look attractive, but we know that they would be as coercive as possible. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Ferdinand Chen. I'm the past president of the Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce of North America. So I've been retired for a long time. I'm the fourth, president of Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce, local, North California, the Forbes, and right now it's 33. So,
Wow. Okay, I got it.
so long times ago. Since I'm retired, I spend more time in Taiwan.
Right.
So I travel, maybe 1/3 of the time stay in Taiwan and then, in the States. My concern, now is that security of Taiwan. From AIT standpoint, I would like to know that, from what I can collect, the real dangers of Taiwan is Chinese communists try very hard to, force or take over Taiwan, but what I can, what I feel, the only way that they can do is actually from internal, not, from outside power. I don't think, they can do that. But the inside, they try very hard, KMT now is, looks like part of the communist China. And also a lot of youngsters that they have financed. Is there any policy that the U.S. would try to help or try to emphasize to the current government that from Taiwan government to do something about this?
Well, I'm not as pessimistic as you are. I've seen it. I mean, if you'd asked me in April of 2019, after a trip I took to Taiwan, then my level of concern was real high, just because of the sorts of things you're mentioning. I do think, however, that the rest of 2019 changed things completely. Basically, something that doesn't get much publicity is, but the fact that there has been legislation in Taiwan to address some of these issues, but more importantly, Hong Kong happened. And so there's still huge attempts by the mainland to spread disinformation inside Taiwan. Much of that ultimately falls apart, and it ends up looking ridiculous. I don't know if you heard the story about the Chinese proclaiming that President Tsai had sent military troops into Taichung to suppress demonstrations. There were pictures of the tank man from Tiananmen, when he stood up to the PLA tanks, and I was literally in Taipei at the time, and I swear everybody I knew had seen that film of the tank man in Tiananmen Square probably 20 times. And I'm thinking, this is crazy to use that. And of course, most everybody in Taiwan has somebody in Taichung they can call up and say, "Oh, are you safe from the tanks?" And they said, "What? No, what tanks?" So a lot of it falls apart on its own. The government has gotten better in terms of responding to disinformation. There is still money floating around. I am not as pessimistic about the KMT as you are, because I think some of the younger folks are fine. Wang Fu, Ma Yingjiao, that's a different story. I hope there's not. But basically, I think if the KMT has a future, it's going to have to tilt towards the middle and say, okay, we're not going to talk about the 92 consensus, and as they've already said, one country, two systems, that doesn't work. Remember, KMT has said that. So, I do think that the threat from disinformation and influence in Taiwan is greater than any place else in the world. But I do think you have a democracy that's strong enough to respond to it. And that's what has really made me much more optimistic about Taiwan's future. Even now, the government gets blamed for mishandling the COVID. They come up with a response that looks more effective, and the opinion starts to swing back. And the opinion never swings into, well, gee whiz, because of this we want unification with the mainland. And don't forget, before any government can even start talks with the mainland, they have to get the approval of 3/4 of the legislature. if those talks lead to results, 3/4 of the legislature have to be willing to pass forward a referendum where over 50% of the people have to vote, and of course a majority of them have to approve. Those are bars that will never be able to be carried over. You know, I mean, basically, one of the things I worry about is the mainland must realize that public sentiment has shifted against China, and as the only tools they have left seem to be coercive tools, it's hard to imagine how it swings back. You know, the 32 steps, you know, trying to attract through economic attraction, you know, leads him to come here rather than go to Shanghai. You know, basically, you know, the steps haven't worked, and they don't really have too many other things for attraction other than trying to bribe local leaders and politicians, and that eventually gets found out. So I'm actually optimistic on the ability to, relatively optimistic on the ability of Taiwan internally to resist that. The external pressure is what I worry about, because that will continue and that will increase. Anyhow, I think I've got to go or I'm going to miss my flight, but
You still have some time.
9:40, right?
Oh, 9:40. I've got
You
till
still
10. Oh, okay. So sorry, I was getting nervous.
My turn.
Okay, here we go.
I haven't shared with you before. I did involve in 5 lawsuit federal court in the United States, and that is back into 2006, and a group of Taiwanese filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Government. I don't know, you heard of that before. No?
Probably heard about what is it about?
De jure sovereignty. De
De
jure sovereignty.
jure sovereignty. Interesting. Okay.
Okay, and I actually organized a group of friends from Taiwan, also from California and New York. We gathered and we packed into the courtroom in the appeal court. So there are 3 judges, circuit court judge, on the stage, and then interview. They had an oral debate. So the attorney on behalf of our group and also attorney on behalf of the U.S. government. I mean, that's not the State Department, it's a Jewish Department, I think.
Justice Department.
Justice Department, okay. So the judge asked, how do you recognize the international treaty to the attorney on behalf of U.S. government? They said, of course, everyone knows that the international treaty equal to our Constitution. Okay, so the second question is that, how do you think about the San Francisco Peace Treaty? Of course, that still stands good, right? Okay, and then this group on behalf of Taiwan people, they argue there's one language called principal occupying power. Okay, how do you interpret that? Okay, and then later on, you know, that the judge guiding to that principal occupying power equal to the de jure sovereignty. Okay, so step by step and to the end, and I just kind of show all this is in the written paper anyway, and I haven't had a chance to translate into Mandarin and publish in the website, so you actually can put it out. I can forward to you. The judge told her that I think you are in trouble. Okay, and the attorney also say I'm shaking. Okay, so that's the. But anyway, the final opinion statement, they say, due to the Taiwan's relation between China and United States, that the people of Taiwan live in the political purgatory. They don't have the official government recognized by the international community. So based on that, I have a few questions to ask you.
Okay. I'll put on my lawyer's hat.
Okay.
And by the way, I came into the Foreign Service rather than go to law school. So my opinions are not going to be well
Okay,
informed.
yeah. For that group, I was CEO. So I had a group of actually behind me while we had a lawsuit. Anyway, the question is that one day, back into email Chen's, Professor Chen's question, one day if Taiwan and the United States, they recognize each other or even upgrade the tech role to the Taiwan embassy, will that AIT still stand?
Well, we are a nation of laws. That I do know. People keep on telling me that.
Yeah.
And it would require a change in legislation. You've got the Taiwan Relations Act, which manages the relationship between the U.S. and a non-diplomatic partner. So if it was to be upgraded to a diplomatic partner, you'd have to get Congress and the President to agree to void, withdraw, annul the Taiwan Relations Act. I'd be out of a job, guys. Come on, don't say that. Yeah, I think that again, I assume that would be a core requirement. So in other words, if you peel that back, no president can wake up one day and say, I'm going to establish diplomatic relations with Taiwan. That wasn't the intention of the initial act, but as far as I look at the act, I don't think that it's revocable by presidential fiat. In fact, I'm positive it isn't, because that's what the Congress was trying to do. They were worried about the direction of the executive with respect to Taiwan, and they wanted to make sure that Taiwan's security remained a prime consideration for U.S. presidents going forward, and that Taiwan would not be sold out at some point under some sort of backroom deal with the mainland Chinese. So from your perspective, something that I think is a very good thing sort of makes what you are advocating much more difficult.
And second question, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, publicly said the Taiwan has never been part of China. Do you agree for this?
Well, it's a matter of fact that Taiwan has never been part of the People's Republic of China. You can easily argue over Taiwan has never been part of China because, under the Qing dynasty for a while it was, under the Ming it was. You could also say it was part of the Netherlands. but anyhow, that's another question.
That's it. Okay. I think I got a minute.
So getting back to the core question is, frankly, a lot of people in Washington, including, and a lot of people in Honolulu, spend a lot of time trying to figure out what China is going to do next on anything, and we're very bad at predicting it. And I tell people that's for a couple of reasons. China has changed quite a bit, and the levers that we thought would constrain Chinese behavior don't seem to be working that well. People coming out of Wall Street will tell you that the interdependency of the two economies is so great that we can't possibly imagine the Chinese doing anything that would rupture the economic ties. It doesn't seem to work. They keep on doing things against their own economic interests from our perspective. So, for example, just this past 10 days or 2 weeks, I've had to learn what variable interest equities are. I didn't know that at all. I see our economists here nodding sagely. So when you put a Chinese company supposedly on the New York Stock Exchange, you're just buying shares in a shell company in the Cayman Islands that has a contractual relationship with that company. and has no legal standing under Chinese law, and now you have the Chinese deciding, we want more control over this. And so if you think you've got a share in a company where you have any control over what it does, you've lost that, and maybe you will even lose your shares at the will of the government. Doing that makes no sense. You know, trying to make sure, if you assume that the growth in the economy is less important than control over the economy, that's a prism that kind of works. And so you've gotten to the point where saying economic rationality will not serve as a brake if it in any way conflicts with the desire for the security of the regime. And the regime will decide that. And that gets to the second thing that we don't take into enough consideration. China has evolved from a collective leadership under this, to some degree, the later Deng years, but clearly under Jiang and Hu, into a one-man dictatorship again. It's like the Mao Zedong era. And did Mao Zedong set out to kill 35 million people during the Great Leap Forward? No. He set policy, and then he got feedback on that policy, and he saw fields that had wheat growing high, and peasants who were plump and happy, and they were all trucked in, you know, replanting wheat from elsewhere, and it was all, as we call it, Potemkin village, to show the leader how good the policy, how well the policy was being implemented. I worry about the same thing in China. Xi Jinping sets a policy. It's a very brave person who will criticize the policy. Now, the encouraging thing is I don't really think that policy is completely set on Taiwan. You know, they leave this room for saying peaceful. They've redefined peaceful to a large degree to be gray zone tactics and coercion, but they can go back a little bit if they want to at some point. But I do worry about the point that might be reached where Xi Jinping says, oh, gray zone tactics don't work, peaceful, the other more peaceful tactics like economic attraction haven't worked, so what's left to me? And at that point, you know, we want to be in a position where Taiwan, the US, and friendly partners and allies around the world have convinced Xi Jinping himself that it makes more sense to try and pull back from his previously announced policy than to take disastrous action against Taiwan that could prove disastrous for him and his regime. And that's, when I talk about deterrence, that's what I mean. It's how can you make it so obvious that there would be disastrous consequences for China if they do it, that it doesn't become an attractive option. That day when, as I said earlier, I'm optimistic gray zone tactics are not going to work. You know, you don't beat people into submission if they have any options at all. There will be a point probably where Xi Jinping acknowledges that gray zone and coercion aren't working, and we hope at that point that you get a serious discussion about the future of Taiwan that basically probably moves back to, if we want unification, it's only going to happen in the distant future. Good enough for Mao should be good enough for Xi Jinping. That's what he seems to want to be, is the second coming of Mao Zedong, who wanted to kick it 100 years down the road.
Real action need to be taken because of Hong Kong's issue. Everybody was talking, right?
Excuse me?
The real action need to be taken against the PRC because Hong Kong's issue. Everybody discuss and talk, right? I see you started to do something and that, but things just kind of die down and that. So I hope the free world need to really understand that that's a pretty serious threat to them. But what PRC is doing is really threat to the worldwide, not just to Taiwan, right?
Yeah, and I think that is coming, and I would throw Xinjiang in there too. You know, Xinjiang and Hong Kong are both pretty much shocks to people who want to pretend that the PRC is a normal regime with normal concerns. You know, and again, you know, the EU adopting sanctions was encouraging. You know, I mean, there are various levers that countries can use, and you always tend to use the ones that you hope will get the results you want, but with the least cost to everybody. And so, yeah, we'll sanction more people over developments in Hong Kong, I'm pretty sure. I'm not really in on that discussion, but I think we'll probably go that way. The Chinese hate it, and it does get their attention, but I think we're in for a long haul. China is a threat not just to Taiwan, it's a threat to the United States, and we've got to find a way to manage that threat.
So what's the likelihood that the Xi Jinping regime could collapse? And if not, he assumed to be with a third term for additional 5 years, then so what will be the future of Chinese?
I sincerely think that Xi Jinping's plan is to go out horizontally, not vertically. And when I say to leave Zhou, I think he wants to stay in power as long as he's alive. Mm-hmm. That references to how he makes his final departure from Zhongnanhai.
What's the resistance emperor inside China? Resistance, how much?
I don't think there's much.
Not much?
Yeah, I don't think there's much, but it's hard to say. And you don't have polls, shall we say. More importantly, you do have pretty pervasive security systems. I do think that whenever people start pushing back, he gets shocked. And so his inclination is to try and change things enough to take care of that, but also to crush those who actually engaged in the protests. Mm-hmm. And that's what people learn. And also what people learn is that China has been this poor, horrible victim of the world for 150 years, and now Xi Jinping is leading it back to its rightful place on the world stage. I mean, that's what people are fed daily. Mm-hmm. And as long as the economic good times continue for the urban